Have you ever wondered how someone can look you in the eyes, tell you they want you, touch you like you're the only person in the world, and then the very next day give that same intimacy to someone else without guilt, without hesitation, without even looking back? Because what if I told you it's not passion, it's not love, and it's definitely not chemistry, it's something far colder, far more calculated, and once you understand the psychology behind it, you'll stop blaming yourself and start seeing the pattern for what it really is. Because when a narcissist sleeps with anybody, it isn't desire driving them, it's hunger. At the core of narcissistic behavior lies a powerful and often misunderstood drive that has very little to do with love and almost everything to do with validation. Because while most people enter relationships hoping to feel closeness, trust, and emotional safety, the narcissist enters interactions with a completely different agenda, one that revolves around being admired, desired, and constantly reassured of their worth. And this difference changes everything about how they connect with others, because connection requires vulnerability. It requires seeing another human being as separate and valuable. It requires empathy, compromise, and mutual care. Yet validation is a one-way transaction where the only goal is to receive attention and affirmation without giving anything real in return. So when a narcissist flirts, pursues, or becomes intimate with someone, they are not thinking about building a shared future or deepening emotional bonds. They are subconsciously asking a single question, which is, what can this person give me that makes me feel bigger, more important, more desirable right now? And that question drives their choices far more than affection ever could. Because deep inside, many narcissists sits a fragile self-esteem that feels unstable and easily threatened, even if on the surface they appear confident or superior. And this fragile core cannot sustain itself internally, meaning they cannot generate self-worth on their own the way emotionally healthy people can. So they must constantly borrow it from the outside world, collecting praise, compliments, attention, and desire like emotional fuel. And every time someone looks at them with attraction or admiration, it temporarily soothes that inner insecurity, giving them a quick rush of significance, almost like a psychological high. But because that high fades quickly, they are forced to keep chasing it again and again, which is why their relationships often feel intense at first and empty soon after. Because once the initial admiration slows down and real intimacy begins to require effort and accountability, they lose interest, since connection feels heavy and demanding, while validation feels fast and easy. And this is also why they may move rapidly from person to person, not because they are deeply passionate or wildly romantic, but because each new person represents a fresh source of attention, a new mirror reflecting back the image they want to see. And mirrors are replaceable, so people become interchangeable, reduced to roles rather than respected as individuals. And when you are with someone like this, you might notice that conversations constantly return to them, their achievements, their problems, their needs, their image, as if your existence mainly serves to applaud, comfort, or admire them. Because emotionally, they are not standing beside you. They are standing in front of you, waiting for you to validate them. And the moment you stop providing that steady stream of praise, the moment you have your own needs or boundaries, they may withdraw, criticize, or look elsewhere, not out of cruelty alone, but because their entire system is built on avoiding the terrifying feeling of insignificance. So they cling to validation the way a drowning person clings to air, which means what looks like romance is often desperation, what looks like charm is often strategy, and what feels like intimacy is often just performance, designed to extract reassurance rather than create genuine emotional closeness. When you look closely at how a narcissist approaches intimacy, you begin to realize that what most people consider a tender, mutual experience is, for them, something far more strategic, almost mechanical. Because instead of seeing closeness as a way to bond emotionally or build trust, they see it as leverage, as a means to gain control, admiration, and psychological dominance over another person. And this shift in motive completely transforms the meaning of every affectionate gesture they offer, because what appears warm on the surface often carries an invisible agenda underneath. Since for a narcissist, intimacy is not about sharing themselves, but about securing influence. And the fastest way to influence someone is to create emotional attachment, to make that person feel chosen, special, desired. And once that attachment forms, the narcissist holds the upper hand, because the more invested you become, the more power they quietly accumulate. So touch, sex, compliments, and intense eye contact become tools rather than expressions of love, carefully deployed to pull you closer, to lower your guard, to make you trust them deeply. And once you trust them deeply, you are easier to manipulate, easier to control, easier to keep orbiting around their needs, which is why the early stages with them often feel intoxicating, almost unreal, as if you have finally met someone who sees you completely, someone who desires you passionately, someone who connects with you on a rare and electric level. But what you are actually experiencing is not depth, it is acceleration, because they rush intimacy to create dependency quickly, knowing that the faster you bond, the faster you will prioritize them, and that urgency is rarely about romance, but about securing supply, about ensuring that you become another steady source of admiration and reassurance that feeds their fragile ego. And once they sense that you are hooked emotionally, the dynamic subtly changes, because now intimacy can be given or withheld as a form of control. Affection becomes conditional, warmth becomes unpredictable, and suddenly you find yourself working for the very closeness they once gave freely. Trying harder to please them, trying harder to regain that initial intensity, not realizing that this cycle is exactly what keeps you psychologically tethered to them, because intermittent rewards create stronger attachments than consistent kindness. So they might shower you with passion one week and then grow cold the next. Not because their feelings naturally fluctuate, but because unpredictability keeps you chasing. And while you are chasing, you are focused on winning them back rather than questioning their behavior, which strengthens their dominance even further. And at the same time, every act of intimacy also serves as ego fuel, because being desired confirms their sense of superiority. Every person who wants them becomes proof that they are exceptional, powerful, irresistible. So sex and affection are not just about controlling you, but also about inflating their self-image, almost like trophies that reassure them of their worth. And the tragedy is that none of it requires genuine care for the other person, because you are valued for what you provide rather than who you are. Your feelings become secondary to the role you play in regulating their ego. And the more you give, the more they take, until intimacy stops feeling safe or mutual and starts feeling like something you must earn, negotiate, or fear losing, leaving you confused, drained, and constantly questioning yourself while they remain focused only on maintaining control and securing their next emotional hit. For a narcissist, sex often becomes something very different from what it means to emotionally healthy people. Because while most individuals see physical intimacy as the natural expression of trust, affection, and emotional closeness that develops over time, the narcissist treats it like a shortcut, a fast track to attention, admiration, and instant validation, almost like pressing a button that immediately delivers reassurance without requiring the slower, more vulnerable work of genuine connection. And this is where the psychology becomes deeply revealing, because building real intimacy takes patience, empathy, and mutual understanding, all qualities that require emotional depth and accountability, yet admiration through sexual desire happens quickly and effortlessly. So if someone already struggles with insecurity and an unstable sense of self, it makes perfect sense that they would choose the faster route every time, since it offers immediate proof that they are wanted, attractive, and important, and that proof acts like a temporary shield against the quiet shame or emptiness they carry inside. So instead of sitting with their insecurities or developing authentic self-worth, they chase the rush of being desired because desire feels powerful and power feels safer than vulnerability. And the moment someone expresses sexual interest in them, it sends a loud psychological message that says you matter, you are irresistible, you have value, and that message can be intoxicating, especially for someone who constantly doubts themselves beneath the surface. So sex becomes less about pleasure or connection and more about self-soothing, almost like an emotional painkiller that numbs their inner discomfort. But like any quick fix, it fades quickly because validation that comes from outside never truly sticks, meaning they need to repeat the experience again and again just to maintain the same sense of worth, which is why they may pursue multiple partners, flirt compulsively, or jump from one encounter to another without pause, not necessarily because they feel deep attraction each time, but because each new person offers another hit of attention, another moment of feeling special, another temporary escape from their internal void. And over time, this pattern turns intimacy into something mechanical, almost transactional, where the other person becomes simply the source of the next ego boost, rather than a human being with emotions and needs. And you might notice how quickly they escalate physical closeness early on, pushing for sexual chemistry before emotional trust has even formed. Because the faster they secure that validation, the faster they calm their anxiety about being insignificant. And once they receive what they were seeking, their interest can suddenly cool, leaving you confused about how something that felt so intense could evaporate overnight. But to them, the purpose was already served. The reassurance was obtained. The ego was fed. So there is no deeper bond anchoring them to stay. And this is why their intimacy can feel strangely hollow or disconnected, even when it appears passionate. Because the focus is inward rather than mutual, centered on what they are getting rather than what they are sharing. And the tragic irony is that despite all this chasing, despite all the encounters, they rarely feel truly fulfilled, because attention gained through shortcuts cannot replace the stability that comes from genuine emotional connection. Yet, slowing down enough to build that connection would require the very vulnerability they spend their lives trying to avoid. One of the most defining psychological traits that separates a narcissist from emotionally healthy individuals is a profound deficit in empathy. And without empathy, the entire structure of relationships changes in ways that are both subtle and deeply damaging, because empathy is what allows you to step into another person's emotional world, to feel their hurt, to consider their needs, to pause before acting, because you understand that your choices carry consequences for someone you care about. And when that capacity is weak or underdeveloped, other people stop feeling fully real. They stop being complex human beings with inner lives and instead become objects that exist mainly in relation to the narcissist's own desires, which means loyalty, attachment, and responsibility do not carry the same emotional weight they do for most people, since those qualities are built on caring about how your actions affect someone else. And if you cannot truly register another person's pain, there is very little internal barrier stopping you from betraying them, using them, or discarding them the moment they no longer serve a purpose. So when it comes to intimacy, this lack of empathy becomes especially stark because sex and closeness normally create bonds that make people protective of each other. Bonds that say, I don't want to hurt you, I don't want to risk losing what we have, I value your heart. But a narcissist often experiences none of that emotional gravity, so they can move from one person to another with startling ease, not necessarily out of cruelty in a conscious sense, but out of emotional blindness, almost like someone stepping on a shadow without realizing it belongs to a person. And this is why they can lie so smoothly, cheat without visible guilt, or promise exclusivity while already pursuing someone else, because the inner alarm system that would normally trigger remorse simply does not fire with the same intensity. And without remorse, there is no natural break on their behavior, only self-interest guiding their choices, which turns relationships into calculations rather than commitments, where the question is never how will this affect my partner, but always what do I want right now. And if sleeping with someone new offers excitement, validation, or advantage, they may pursue it without fully grasping the emotional fallout they leave behind. And when confronted, they often seem confused by the depth of the other person's pain, minimizing it, rationalizing it, or even blaming the victim for being too sensitive. Because from their limited perspective, it truly does not feel like a big deal. They cannot intuitively feel the betrayal the way you do, which makes their apologies hollow and their promises unreliable. Since genuine change requires understanding the harm caused, and that understanding depends on empathy. And without it, loyalty becomes fragile, attachment becomes shallow, and people become replaceable. So intimacy loses its sacredness and becomes just another experience to consume. And if you have ever been on the receiving end of this, you may have felt the disorienting shock of realizing that someone who shared your bed could walk away as if nothing happened, as if the memories meant nothing, as if you were interchangeable with the next person who shows interest. And that cold detachment is not a reflection of your worth, but a reflection of their emotional limitation, a limitation that prevents them from forming the deep, enduring bonds that make love stable and trustworthy. Another powerful force driving a narcissist's sexual and relational behavior is impulsivity combined with a constant craving for stimulation, because beneath the surface of their charm and calculated image, there is often a restless nervous system that cannot tolerate boredom, stillness, or emotional neutrality. And while emotionally healthy people can find comfort in stability, routine, and long-term connection, a narcissist frequently experiences those same things as dull, suffocating, or even threatening to their sense of excitement and importance. So instead of settling into the slow, steady rhythm that sustains real intimacy, they chase intensity, novelty, and dramatic highs, almost like someone addicted to adrenaline. And this creates a pattern where new experiences feel far more rewarding than familiar ones, meaning the thrill of meeting someone new, flirting, seducing, and conquering can feel electrifying compared to the quiet security of an established relationship, because novelty feeds their ego and keeps them feeling alive, chosen, and powerful, whereas consistency feels ordinary. And ordinary feels unacceptable to someone who secretly fears being insignificant. So they begin to associate excitement with worth and calm with emptiness, which makes them far more likely to act on sudden desires without considering long-term consequences. And this is where impulsivity takes over, because instead of pausing to reflect on how their choices might hurt their partner, damage trust, or destabilize their life, they follow whatever impulse promises immediate gratification in the moment, telling themselves they deserve it, that it's harmless, or that they can manage the fallout later. And this short-term thinking leads to risky behaviors such as casual encounters, secret affairs, overlapping relationships, or reckless decisions that prioritize the rush of the present over the stability of the future. And what makes it especially confusing for their partners is how spontaneous and unpredictable it all seems. Because one day they may appear devoted and affectionate, and the next day they are chasing someone new simply because the opportunity presented itself. Not because their current partner did anything wrong, but because their internal system is wired to seek stimulation constantly, almost like a child grabbing the next shiny object, and each new person becomes another source of excitement, another story to tell themselves about how desirable and adventurous they are, another temporary escape from the monotony they dread. So sex and intimacy become part of this thrill-seeking cycle, rather than an expression of emotional depth, used to generate dopamine rather than connection. And after the excitement fades, they often feel restless again, scanning their environment for the next hit of attention or novelty, which explains why they can sabotage perfectly good relationships simply because things feel too calm or predictable, mistaking peace for lack of passion, and without strong impulse control or empathy to ground them. They repeat the pattern over and over, chasing highs, creating chaos, and leaving a trail of confused and hurt people behind them, all while convincing themselves that they are just following their desires rather than recognizing that they are trapped in a cycle of stimulation seeking that prevents them from ever building something stable, secure, and genuinely intimate. At the heart of the narcissist's relationship pattern is a deeply transactional mindset, a way of relating to people that resembles a business exchange far more than an emotional bond, because instead of asking, how can we grow together, or how can I care for this person, the narcissist unconsciously evaluates every connection through the lens of what am I getting out of this and how useful is this person to me right now, and that subtle shift in perspective changes everything about how intimacy functions, because when relationships are transactional, affection becomes currency, attention becomes leverage, and even sex becomes a bargaining chip rather than a shared expression of closeness. So rather than seeing a partner as someone to protect and cherish, they see them as a source of benefits, whether those benefits are admiration, status, financial support, convenience, or ego reinforcement. And as long as those benefits keep flowing, the relationship appears stable, sometimes even passionate. But the stability is conditional, because the moment the perceived value drops or a better offer appears, their commitment weakens without much internal conflict. And this is why they can detach so quickly or replace someone so easily. Not because the memories meant nothing, but because their attachment was never rooted in emotional depth to begin with. It was rooted in utility, almost like upgrading a device when a newer model becomes available. And this way of thinking often operates beneath conscious awareness, which is what makes it so unsettling, because they may genuinely say loving words or make convincing promises while still evaluating you like an asset behind the scenes, measuring what you provide against what you cost them in effort, accountability, or compromise. And if you start expressing needs, setting boundaries, or expecting reciprocity, they may experience that not as normal relationship behavior, but as a loss of profit, as if the deal is becoming less favorable. So instead of leaning in and working through challenges, they may withdraw, devalue you, or seek someone else who demands less and gives more admiration. And intimacy in this framework becomes another tool for negotiation, because physical closeness can secure loyalty, create emotional dependency, or keep someone invested, so they might use sex or affection strategically to pull you back when they sense you drifting away, not out of heartfelt reconnection, but to maintain control of the exchange. And when you step back and observe the pattern, it can feel strangely impersonal, as if you were cast in a role rather than loved for who you truly are, because the focus is always on function rather than essence, on what you do for them rather than who you are as a human being. And this is also why they often keep multiple options open, lining up backups or entertaining new prospects even while committed, because from a transactional mindset, it feels practical to diversify resources rather than invest everything in one person. So exclusivity feels risky and loyalty feels limiting. And the tragic irony is that by treating relationships like transactions, they sabotage the very thing they secretly crave, which is genuine, secure connection. Because real love cannot grow where people are constantly being weighed, compared, and evaluated for their usefulness, rather than valued simply for their presence. When you step back and look at the entire pattern clearly, without excuses, without romanticizing it, without telling yourself stories about passion or chemistry, the truth becomes impossible to ignore, because what you are witnessing is not love gone wrong, it is not uncontrollable desire, and it is not some mysterious magnetic personality that just can't help itself. It is a system, a psychological survival strategy built on validation, control, shortcuts to attention, emotional blindness, impulsive thrill-seeking, and cold transactions. And once you understand that, everything starts to make painful but freeing sense. because the narcissist is not moving from person to person, searching for connection. They are moving from person to person, trying to escape themselves, trying to silence an inner emptiness that no amount of sex, admiration, or conquest can ever truly satisfy. So intimacy becomes consumption rather than communion. People become resources rather than partners. And relationships become stages where they perform desirability instead of building trust, which is why they can sleep with almost anybody without the emotional weight most of us feel. Because for them, it was never sacred to begin with. It was functional, it was fuel, it was ego maintenance. And the most important thing for you to remember is that their behavior is not a reflection of your worth, your attractiveness, or your value as a partner, because you were not competing in a fair emotional system. You were offering love to someone who only knew how to trade. You were offering depth to someone addicted to surface-level validation. You were offering connection to someone terrified of vulnerability, and no matter how perfect you tried to be, you could never fill a void that they refused to face themselves. So the real power comes not from trying to understand how to keep them or fix them, but from recognizing the pattern early, refusing to personalize their choices, and protecting your heart from someone who treats intimacy like a tool instead of a bond. Because healthy love is steady, respectful, and mutual, it does not leave you confused, competing, or constantly proving yourself. It does not make you feel replaceable, and the moment you stop chasing their approval and start honoring your own standards, you break the cycle completely. You step out of their game, and you save your energy for relationships where intimacy actually means closeness, loyalty, and care rather than control, validation,